So I'm sitting here with Sheila Quinn. Sheila has been instrumental in the naturopathic medicine movement and also has been instrumental in functional medicine. And I wanted to kind of start the conversation, Sheila, with just asking you a little bit about your long career in both of those fields over the past, I think, 40 years, really. And as you know, of course, much has changed in the healthcare landscape over that time, and specifically over IFM in 30 years. And as I say, you started your career at least a decade before. And what do you see as the biggest changes in medicine and the functional medicine, integrated medicine community space in particular? And how do you think this is really impacting clinicians, but also patients?
Well, first of all, because it began in 1978, it's actually like 43 years. I can't believe that. But it is like night and day looking back that far. Of course, I can only speak about changes I've experienced or observed. And, healthcare is such a humongous field that many others will have different perspectives. But from my perspective, one of the biggest changes is that the awareness that health entails more than the administration of drugs for diagnosed disease has become really widespread. That was definitely not the case 45 years ago when Bastyr was founded, or 30 years ago when IFM began. Both of these fields have fought really hard for the understanding that health is a complex outcome influenced by so many different factors: genetics, diet, nutrition, environment, socioeconomic status, and many other things as well. So we don't really think of health anymore as what the doctor delivers, as much as the doctor delivers information that helps the person to craft a lifestyle and sort of personal best practices that will deliver health over the long haul. I think that's a real revolution.
Agreed. So I think you have a really interesting perspective from your career, again, in the naturopathic medical community, where you were one of the founders of Bastyr, and you were helped to really elevate the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians. And then in 1999, you came to IFM when it was becoming a not-for-profit 501c3, and helped shepherd that process. The process of becoming that not-for-profit, the process of applying for and receiving from the ACCME continuing medical education credit, and then you were the editor of the textbook of functional medicine. I thought it would be interesting if you could talk a bit about, you have a good idea of the leaders in both of those groups, and how you see kind of the similarities philosophically and perhaps the differences.
There are many similarities, of course, and it was an amazing experience to be in a front row seat watching the development of two such important organizations. I think many of the similarities are generated because the pathway for nonprofits, not just in healthcare, but we're specifically talking about healthcare education right now, from founding to, let's say, maturity, is very similar. I mean, there's such a demand for resources in those early years that juggling that demand with the needs of this burgeoning organization, you need to do everything all at once. And of course you can't. So it's a balancing act. And in those early years, the leaders really have to be cognizant of that. They have to both help shepherd the organization along, ensuring that progress continues to be made while not overstepping, because overstepping can lead to organizational death. I mean, one of the biggest reasons for failure of small business, but this is also true in nonprofits, is failure to manage growth. If you cannot manage the growth, you will die. So when you bring together a group of visionaries who maybe don't have a lot of business skills or the ability to actually understand organizational development, then you need somebody like me and many other people, of course, who can kind of continually bring that awareness into that discussion. And it's very challenging at times. It's hard to always kind of be the no person when it comes to budgeting, but there's a big payoff for being that kind of for engaging in that kind of self-discipline for organizations in the early years, which is that your foundation becomes much stronger for it. And I will say, I mean, I felt like in the early years at Bastyr, there was a lot of understanding of that. In the early years that I was at IFM, it was really different because IFM already existed. The issue was that it had been a part of a much larger commercial organization, first HealthCom and then Metagenics. So when I came, my first assignment was to kind of lift IFM out of that commercial environment and help create a freestanding and independent nonprofit organization, because I had, all those years in nonprofit organizations and also in helping to build small organizations. So that was very challenging. It was different than starting from scratch. You had existing patterns, you had an existing history that had to be dealt with. So in my early years at IFM, one of the issues was we had to make it a priority to communicate that identity shift to people who were very attached to IFM and really probably couldn't have cared less about the organizational structure, but to really communicate with them, not only that identity had changed, but that there were really good reasons for it. And this was going to open up a pathway to future growth. So communications was really important. And of course, I don't know if there are better communicators than Jeff Bland, but he is somebody who can communicate, at warp speed. And I think for most of us, we took on that challenge of trying to communicate the identity shift and the reasons for it.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I was involved with IFM when you came on, and because I was working for Metagenics at the time, and the point that you make of it, it wasn't started from scratch. It was turned into a different organization, and that created. I remember, IFM had a persona that then had to change. It became a 501c3, a nonprofit. It was a completely unconnected or disconnected to any commercial entities, i.e. Metagenics. And that was quite a shift because everybody, when they thought of IFM, they thought of Metagenics and IFM kind of synonymously. So that kind of shift, I remember being on the podium quite a number of times and clarifying with people that shift, and you have to reinforce that a number of times. So both externally and then internally, what you had to do with all of these different educators, and as we're even putting the textbook of functional medicine together, clarifying all of that, I think that is a great point.
And it took years, honestly, exactly. even after all the years that I was there are still people I run into very occasionally who still think of IFM as part of Metagenics. And, I don't even say anything anymore because of course I'm gone, but inside of me, I'm going, really?
Right. It's 20 years.
Yeah, I think there's another big both similarity and difference, and that is the accreditation challenge. I think that in the long run, accreditation is good for organizations. It makes them decide which standards they're going to be judged by. It makes them really strive to live up to those standards. And both Bester and IFM face the challenge of even getting a recognized accrediting agency to review it, because it was seen as so far outside, they were both seen as so far outside the mainstream. Now, there's a danger in that, because when you set yourself up to be judged by organizations that live inside the mainstream, you risk muting your own kind of vision and mission in order to gain their approval. And in the long run, I don't think that is good for organizations. But in the kind of short run, let's say 10 to 15, 20 years, it does really strengthen you, because for one thing, they lay out a whole lot of standards that affect every aspect of your organization. So it's kind of like a pathway to organizational strength. And if you follow that and you take it seriously, you will get stronger for it. So that too was kind of a balancing act, to take accreditation really seriously, to get the best out of it on behalf of your constituents and the public, but not to let it rule your mission. So that was a challenge, and it may still be. I don't really know where IFM is with that today.
I would say it's still a balancing act, Sheila, in the same ways that you just described it. And I think part of that balancing act is to, from a educational standpoint, one is trying to forge a new road. We're talking about integrative medicine. We're talking about something that conventional medicine doesn't necessarily accept or is not on the same page. And so when you're trying to work with conventional organizations like the ACCME, you have to, or it's, you have to balance what you are doing in terms of what is the evidence base with what is the conventional medicine evidence base. So that's just essentially agreeing with you that I think it continues to be a balancing process of how an organization grows, particularly an organization that is trying to take some of, is trying to be in some way attached to mainstream medicine, clearly, some way integrated with mainstream medicine.
Yeah, and actually there's a third area I wanted to mention of this kind of similarities, differences, and that is that both these organizations did not have a codified body of knowledge. And so building that while you're building an organization, it's not easy. And for one thing, as you build the organization, you begin to influence that body of knowledge, and it changes and adapts to not only emerging evidence, but emerging understanding in terms of the leadership and the practitioners. So the commitment, I think, to create a codified body of knowledge that can be transmitted, in the case of Bester, to students who are seeking to graduate and practice, but in IFM's case, to a huge range of practitioners from all different kinds of disciplines, in a way that they can be certified, which presents to the public an understandable, knowable standard by which they can expect their choice of practitioner to operate. It's really important, and it's really worth doing, and it's really hard. And I would say that that kind of competing tension between building the organization and building the knowledge base so it can be transmitted in a more standardized way, I'm sure that continues today at both organizations.
Yeah, that's a great point. I often hear myself saying that we are working on the car as we're driving.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
I wanted to ask you a little more about your tenure at IFM and You were with IFM for 15 years, and what accomplishments stood out? We've talked about a few, the textbook and ACCME accreditation, but what other accomplishments for the organization in those, what I would say, formative 15 years, first 15 years as a nonprofit entity? And we've grown, as you know, when you were there, we grew fairly dramatically. We're continuing to grow dramatically. We've when you were there, when IFM started, I don't know if there were 3 or 4 full-time employees, and when I started, there was I still think there was less than 10, and now we have, I believe the number is 90, which it says. Just exploded actually in the past couple of years. But did you anticipate this growth, and what do you attribute that to as you kind of step back and look at things?
Well, I absolutely did not anticipate that growth, and I just
Neither did I.
commend IFM for achieving it. I feel proud of having been part of what helped to create IFM's foundation, but I don't really think I had any idea how you would grow exponentially like that. And I think the people who really created that particular pathway were Lori Hoffman and Andy Crosby, who really set the strategy for growth and then ensured that the organization followed it for a sufficient number of years that now it's able to proceed without them. So that to me is amazing. I don't know how that happens, but I'm better, I guess, in the early years of an organization's life when, a person like me and of course many others needs to do a lot of different things. You have to really be a multitasker. In my job, I had to be, both financially aware, reading content for accuracy, researching for writing, editing, all kinds of different things. And that's kind of my jam. That's I like that a lot. But you have to kind of build everything all at once. You can't go 5 years without personnel policies, for example. You can't dispense with a budget in favor of strengthening your faculty. You have to do all those things at once. And so I guess I feel one of the big achievements in maybe say the first 5 years I was there was that we actually did do that. We built all of these elements, some of them very small, some of them bigger, but that helped to create the foundation that has been built on and resulted in this huge explosion of growth. So yes, getting the ACCME accreditation, that was a really joyful moment. I mean, so many people worked on that because it isn't just writing the self-study, it's the information that the self-study describes that makes the organization worthy of accreditation. So ensuring that everything is done according to the accepted standards, that happens day in and day out, 365 days a year. Writing the self-study takes 3 or 4 or 5 months, but you're using everything that's been learned in all those days and years before you. So that was really great. I will say I gave almost 2 years of my life to the textbook of functional medicine. So probably for me, more than anybody, actually having it published was a huge landmark and very, very exciting. And then, working on the clinical manuals and the monographs and all of that, it was just each one was kind of one more step in building the body of knowledge in a way that it can be passed on without having to be orally taught in a classroom. So those were really great moments.
Yes, it's more than an oral tradition now, I think.
Yeah.
So I want to close with asking you how you see things going forward. in the functional medicine movement, how do you see policy moving forward in ways that supports what we call, the ecosystem, the functional medicine ecosystem, the integrative medicine ecosystem? What needs to happen in the policy arena that you think would make functional medicine even more impactful?
I've probably been gone too long. I don't think I'm really up to date on where all of that is, so I can kind of only speak in more generalities. But one big thing is that the price of continued progress is eternal vigilance. Doors that swung open over these last few decades can easily swing shut. The mainstream healthcare system is the elephant in the room. It can crush purposefully, and that happens still sometimes, but even inadvertently out of lack of awareness or fear of the other, whatever that other is supposed to be. So I think because that is the case, you need to continue to make progress in public awareness, because all of this is ultimately driven by public demand. If the public doesn't use and ask for functional medicine practitioners, this will go away. But many people still don't know what's available. They don't even understand the term. They've never heard the term. So public awareness is crucial. And so is political awareness, because you have to know what you're after. Are you after a level playing field in terms of funding for research and education? Are you after the breaking of some of the discriminatory laws that govern practice? What is it that you're after? And then you have to pursue that in a very systematic and determined fashion.
I think those are all great points, Sheila. And I think the word that you used, vigilant, it's not something that you can kind of rest on. You have to continuously see how you're moving forward. And your other point of that what drives all this medicine is public acceptance and public interest. And you have to continuously, hopefully, educate and inspire the public as well as clinicians. And I think one of the things that IFM is now doing more consciously is reaching out to the public as opposed to just the clinicians. They're both important, and they're intertwined in ways that we really have to recognize and push forward. So I want to thank you again for just taking a few moments and thinking about the past, reminiscing about the past, and thinking about the future. I appreciate it.
It was fun. Thanks for asking me.